Lincolnshire Aviation Heritage Centre here at East Kirkby. How many of you have been for a restoration tour before? Okay, so quite a few of you. So basically what this is the project to get NX611 airworthy again. It's approximately a 10-year project and we're currently in year 2. So the way we've broken the project down is year 0 effectively was a complete survey of the aircraft, a paint strip and a repaint to work out what work we had to do to make her airworthy. Year 1 we did the starboard fin and rudder. We did the trailing edge came off the aircraft for us to survey the rear spar, and we had the engines off on the starboard side, 2 NDT subframes and undercarriage support beam. So year 2 is effectively a copy of year 1 but on the port side. So what we've done this year is we've taken the port fin and rudder off the aircraft, completely bust those down on jigs, assessed everything and started to build them back up again. We've got both inboard and outboard engine from the port side have been removed from the aircraft to enable us to get to the bearers, the subframes and the undercarriage support beams, and the inboard section of the trailing edge has been removed as well. So some of the things we've come across this winter, obviously taking the port fin and rudder apart and assessing all the parts, we've found corroded items, items that are damaged basically through their age and stresses on those parts in the aircraft. So if you turn snowmen, so a figure of 8, two holes next to each other, and when all that is assessed, you have a pile of serviceable parts and you have a pile of unserviceable parts. Unfortunately for us, the pile of unserviceable parts is larger than the pile of serviceable parts. So I'll just run through a few of those things that we found, a few problems we've come across. Obviously the Lancaster was built in April 1945, so it's 73 years old, 74 years old coming up, and what we found is age has taken its toll. So when the aircraft was built, it was only built to do, shall we say, 50 hours before it was likely to get shot down. So 73 years on, some of the parts that were put in haven't stood up to the test of time. One of those in particular is the rudder. So this is called the rudder post. So this is effectively, as it sits on the aircraft, it's the forward face of the rudder where the hinge is attached to it, where it attaches to the fin. One of the modifications that was done to the rudder was to put some strengthening pieces on it. The post is aluminium, the strengthening pieces are steel. So what you find when you have two different metals together is you find dissimilar corrosion. So the metals react with each other effectively and corrode. So I don't know, more eagle-eyed of you perhaps will see we have a gaping hole in the rudder post, and that's where this strengthening piece sat over the top. So obviously adds strength to the structure, but we have that join between the two metals which will hold moisture and creates corrosion, and then the dissimilar corrosion as well between the two. So I will pass this post around. I don't think anyone's going to fit it in their pocket, but if anybody wants to have a look, then they are more than welcome to. So we've got dissimilar corrosion between the two pieces, so the modifications that were put in to strengthen the rudder have of course corroded the actual structure. We have natural corrosion, which is basically just air and moisture getting to the material and corroding the material. So this is a plate which is put on the outside of the rudder where the balance or the weight attaches, and so this is a piece of aluminium riveted to another piece of aluminium, and that white powder there is aluminium corrosion, and that's basically been created because there's been no great barrier between the metal and the atmosphere. So what we found on these structures quite a lot is in modern day, and as we're doing now, when you build the structure up, you have a jointing compound effectively between the two, so it's wet assembled and everything is painted, so that creates a barrier between the two pieces of metal. But on a lot of this structure, a lot of it was just alclad, so it's a very thin coating, if you like, that's on the aluminium when it's produced, rather than any paint inside, and any original paint has fallen off, which has allowed corrosion to get underneath. So we were kind of battling a lot of corrosion on the inner structure of the fin and the rudder. These are some of the rudder pieces which we have removed and are no longer serviceable. It seems that the leading edge of the rudder has taken the majority of the corrosion, because it's more open in there. That's where the hinges fit on, so there's a lot more atmosphere, a lot more water and air can get in there. So a lot of these pieces have been rejected through corrosion on the faces. We've got a lot of figure of 8 holes as well. So that's where a hole has been drilled and a rivet has gone in, and then a hole has been drilled right next to it and actually gone into the side of the hole to create like a snowman effect. Excuse me. So a lot of these parts have been rejected because of that. What we've actually found is the production method used to make these parts is actually why a lot of the parts are no longer serviceable. So where a hole has been drilled in the structure to put a rivet in to hold a rib to a stringer, you've then, when you put the skin on over the top, you've drilled more holes which have then collided with the original holes. So as we're producing it, we're trying to stop that from occurring again. So effectively, when these parts go back on the aircraft, they will be better than the originals when they went on. Effectively, what they've done in the factory is they've produced an airworthy item and instantly made it non-airworthy by putting all these holes in it and colliding holes. And a few more things we found. This is a balance horn, so a weight which sticks on the outside of the rudder. So there's one of these on each side of the rudder. This one is damaged, it's broken over time, and these themselves have led to damage within the rudder as well. These stick out from the post, so all that weight hanging out on the post, and actually you'll find, if you look at that post closely, is it started to crack between holes because of all that weight and the stress when flying from this weight out on the rudder post. So what we're finding now is kind of problems with the design of the aircraft back in 1942-43 that they didn't really consider would be a problem because it wasn't going to last long enough for these stresses to actually create a problem on the aircraft. The Lancaster has quite a lot of mag alloy on it, which is a material which doesn't last very well with air and moisture. So the trailing edge of the rudder is made of mag alloy, so this is just a section of that, and you'll see it's started to corrode, or it's a long way along corroding. Mag alloy is a very light material, but it doesn't really fare very well with corrosion. So you'll see that's got like a honeycomb effect corrosion on it as the corrosion's eaten through. And a lot of that again is because the skin that goes around the rudder is riveted to that, so it traps moisture between the skin and that magnesium alloy. The fin we think is probably slightly better condition than the rudder was. What we've generally found is the port side of the aircraft is worse condition than the starboard side. And we've put that down to it being stood out at Blackpool. The port side faced the sea, the starboard side didn't. So we've found too many cases of the port being worse than the starboard to think that really has got to be something to do with it. Otherwise, it should effectively all be the same condition. So the fin, you'll see as you walk around after the talk that the fin parts on the jig themselves, we have some original parts which are all painted up and put back in. We've also got some original parts that are not serviceable, that are currently in there making the structure, while we wait for the new parts to come back to take their place. So as you look at it, you'll see some corroded parts. They've got skin corrosion on them, like these have some white powdery substance on them. So they're no longer serviceable, but they're in there to help build the structure up and make sure everything's all in line and being built up correctly when the new parts go in. The fin skins, so there's quite a few, well there's a couple of just straight bits of metal skins, so they don't need any shaping, but the majority of them that actually curve around the leading edge of the fin all need wheeling. So you use an English wheel, which is the other side of the trailing edge there, and that actually stretches and kind of closes the skin up to actually produce a curve. So a very skilled person can use the English wheel to curve skins so they fit neatly around in 2 or 3 curves on the fin. So that's something that happens kind of towards the end of the restoration work on the fin. We build the structure up with Clico pins, so just pins that hold the structure together. Make sure everything fits okay, then you replace those pins with rivets. So you build it up with pins, take it back down again, build it up with rivets, and then you put the leading edge on. The leading edge is wood. So originally it was mahogany, so it's just layers of wood all glued together to create the shape. So it's laminated wood effectively. Mahogany now is a controlled substance, so we have put a modification in to make it ash. So ash is actually a lot harder than mahogany, so it comes with its own problems, but it is actually a material we can actually get hold of and use. So the leading edges have all been made. They were actually made last year. When we made the one for the starboard side, we made 3. So 1 for each side and 1 for a mistake. So those are currently in bonded store in a temperature and humidity controlled environment. That'll come out, be fitted to the structure, varnished. You have to varnish it to keep the moisture out of it. So you put varnish on the outside and of course in all the holes as well that you've drilled to attach it to the structure. And then the skins will all be formed to sit around it. When you put the skins on the leading edge, you drill the skin, you drill the wood. Then you have to dimple the skin, you have to dimple the wood, and then you can all screw it together. So it's quite a long process actually attaching those skins to the wooden structure, the wooden leading edge. So the fin and rudder, well, the fin's progressing quite well at the moment. We've got majority of the parts back now, so they can all begin to be built up. You'll see in front of Keith there, he's working on an intermediary post, spar structure for the fin, and to his right-hand side on the top there's a lot of the new ribs that have been produced, just gone through priming, ready to be drilled and fitted to the first fitting of the fin. So that's coming on quite well. The rudder, we've been waiting on a new post to be made, which is what the gentleman's holding there. So this is the original. We've got a new one of these being made here. And this is being made by Simone Cunningham of Cunningham Aero Limited. And so that's basically being knocked out from flat aluminium shapes and produced around a former to make a new section of that. This one's actually come back now, so it's over next to the rudder jig. We're also waiting for some strengthening sections that need to go into it before we can build it back up. So the rudder's a little bit behind, the fin's pretty well on course. A few more things that we've been doing. This section here is actually the trailing edge. That's the inboard trailing edge off the port side. So when you look back at the aircraft, you're looking actually back at the rear web face of the rear spar. So a Lancaster's got four spars for the main spar. At the front you've got a top and a bottom boom. At the rear you've got a top and a bottom boom with a web in between. So it's not like a huge piece of angle iron that runs the whole length of a huge girder. Generally when you say a spar to somebody, they expect a huge piece of metal that is like a girder in your house that's holding a wall up, for example. This is very different. The spars are effectively C-shaped, and there's four of them with a web between that interlock them to give like a box section shape for the wing. So this has been removed to assess the trailing edge, have a look inside. Replaced a lot of anchor nut strips that hold access panels on, and also gives us a chance to have a look at the rear face of the rear spar. So when you look at that spar web up there, it looks brown. That brown is actually, it's actually called oxblood to us, but it's a preservative that was sprayed on when the aircraft was taken apart at RAF Scampton before it went on the gate at Scampton. That material is something that actually, I guess you could say, it saved the aircraft. That preservative was sprayed in anywhere they could get it in copious amounts. So it has actually stopped, it's had a corrosion barrier, it stopped corrosion on the aircraft to the best degree they could. So we're quite fortunate that the RAF took it upon themselves when they serviced the aircraft before they put it out on the gate. They effectively took it apart, assessed things, repaired to a degree what they could, and then sprayed this preservative in. It comes off quite easily with fuel or a degreaser, and of course it just leaves the original paint behind. So one of the things this winter we've got to strip off all that preservative and all the paint and survey the rear spar web and the spar. The trailing edge is actually held on by hundreds of studs. So all those studs have got to be cleaned up on the rear face of the spar web as well. After the talk, you've all got the chance to have a look around the outside of the aircraft, look at the parts that we're doing. So when you do go up and have a look at the trailing edge there, just have a look at all the studs that sit out from the web, and they all bolt through onto the trailing edge here. So that's been surveyed, it's had new anchor nut strips put in. We do know we have some extrusion to replace on the trailing edges, which is the aluminium angle. It's like an L-shaped angle at the top and the bottom of the trailing edge, which actually are the faces that attach to the spar web. So we know that we've got some of those to replace. We'll either have to replace the full length, or we've got to put a repair piece in. That's yet to be decided at the moment. So that's kind of the structure of the aircraft that we've been doing this winter. The port engines have both been removed, and they're both sat over on the starboard side of the aircraft, the clean side of the aircraft effectively. So by all means do go and have a look at those. We've removed the engines to have a look at the bulkheads and have a look at the subframes and the undercarriage support beams. So down here is the subframe for the port inner engine, so the inboard engine. This sits between the undercarriage and the engine effectively. So this bolts to the undercarriage and the undercarriage support beams and the spar, and then the front face bolts to the engine bearers, which hold the engine in. So this has been off for NDT. The problem with these subframe structures is they're a tubular steel structure. So inside you get corrosion on the inside of the steel tubes, just through natural rust corrosion. There's very little, if any, preservative that was actually put inside these tubes when they were produced. So these have all been NDT, they've been X-rayed. So we'll see an X-ray film, effectively like when you go to a hospital for an X-ray, you stand in front of a film and they shoot you with X-rays. That's what's done to these, to find out what level of corrosion, if any, is inside the tubes. We're still waiting on the report to come back for the subframes. So this is the inboard subframe. The outboard subframe is over with the engines on the starboard side of the aircraft. So by all means have a look at that when you go around as well. So these are now being treated for any external corrosion that we found, and very shortly they'll be going to paint. And when they come back from paint, we can start attaching them back on the aircraft. But we are still waiting for the reports back from the subframes. These two items here are the undercarriage support beams. I would pick them up, but they're very heavy. So these basically attach on the front face of the spar, and this is the top of it. So on the bottom, in the bottom lug, just here, the undercarriage bolts to it. And then the subframe bolts onto this lug here, and the top lug here. So this is basically the link which holds the engine to the airframe. Each engine is only really held on to the aircraft by 4 bolts, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, on the lugs on the subframe here. These, we believe, are cast aluminium, or forged aluminium, and these have been off to be inspected and NDT'd. One thing with Lancasters we found, particularly with Mark 10 Canadian Lancasters, is these items are prone to cracking. There's at least 3 of the current surviving Lancasters out in Canada that we know of that have had cracked support beams. So these have been quite an important part for us to check. I have no idea where you go to get a new one of these produced, and I have no idea what it would cost, but there would be at least 4 zeros on it, I'm sure. So luckily for us, these have passed inspection. The inspection for them is an eddy current test around the holes, because if it's going to crack, it's generally going to crack from a hole. So those have been eddy current checked through all the holes with a probe, and these have come out okay. So these will shortly be going off to be painted, and then they can be fitted back onto the front spar of the aircraft. So once these go back on, the subframe can go on, the bulkhead can go on the subframe, and the engine power plant can go back in. So we're currently building up the inboard power plant for the port side. Again, on the starboard side of the aircraft, you can walk around and have a look at that power plant being built up. The power plant is basically the engine, the bearers, the radiator and oil cooler, the diaphragm for the prop, and the header tank. So it's basically a whole unit. So during wartime, they'd have replaced power plants. They wouldn't have replaced engines. They'd have just had spare power plants sat on the in the maintenance hangars, and just brought a whole power plant out and swapped it out. Because basically that's 4 bolts to remove from the aircraft and all the other plumbing and attachments. Much easier and quicker than removing an engine from a power plant. So they're on the starboard side of the aircraft there, as you can see. The engine bearers, that basically the arms that the engines sit on, they've also been removed for NDT. They've been away, been x-rayed, and they come back to be refitted. There is corrosion inside the tubes as we expected, but it's nothing that's actually going to stop us from taxiing the aircraft. One plan this summer is to have brand new engine bearers produced. We went over to Canada in 2009 and brought back, I think it was about 9 Canadian Mark 10 engine bearers. So that gives us all the attachments, all the machined attachments where it fits to the bearers, the subframe, sorry. So we can take all those out of the Canadian bearers and send them off to have the new tubular structure built up, welded up, preservative inside, painted, so they'll be sat ready for the day when we put the new power plants on, ready for airworthiness. On the undercarriage support beams here, we have this item, which is the ancillary panel. So this came off the aircraft, and it started to go through restoration overhaul, ready to go back on. So it's the original wood from the production of the aircraft, so it's actually fared quite well. This sits up behind the undercarriage, slightly above. So when we run the aircraft, if you see a ground crew member jump up on top of the wheel and stays up inside the wheel, the undercarriage well for a while, he's actually at this panel, and this is where the fuel primers sit, the gas primers, and the fuel cocks for priming as well. Also, just up in here is where the trolley accumulator attaches, so that's the ground power where you plug it into the aircraft. So it's a very important panel with the priming and the electric side of the aircraft. And it's an item that you won't really see when it goes back together again, along with the majority of this, but it's an item that we know is in good condition, has been through overall. So this will be reattached once the undercarriage support beams go on, and then the undercarriage can go on after that. The undercarriage is currently sat in front of the aircraft, just on our left-hand side as you look back at it. So that's kind of where we are with the restoration work on the aircraft. All the engines have been serviced ready for next season's taxiing. Do please have a good look around the aircraft. All of this is funded by your attendance effectively, so people coming to have a look at what's happening, people coming during the summertime, having a taxi ride, having a tour on board the aircraft. And we also have a supporters association. We do thankfully get those nice donations through the year as well, which help to restore the aircraft. And of course we have something called the Rivet Club as well. How many people are a member of the Rivet Club? Oh, very good, doing quite well. So the Rivet Club is a monthly donation to the restoration of the aircraft. During the winter time you get a weekly report that comes out to you by email telling you what we've been doing that week. and during the summer you'll get a monthly email updating you on restoration work during the summer and also what's happening around the centre as well. So if you do feel like you'd like to help more with the restoration, then please do by all means join the Rivet Club. It is very informative, hopefully. It's me that writes it, so I'm a little bit biased. Of course, if you want to become a member, you get free admission to the centre all year round as well, bar the air show, which is half price. So thank you very much for your attendance. Of course, everybody that's come today has helped towards the restoration work on this aircraft through your admission tickets, through your cup of tea or food that you bought at the centre. So thank you very much for coming and having a look at what we're doing and supporting the centre here. Please do have a good look around, ask as many questions of me as you would like to. Have a look at what the engineers are doing, whether it's riveting or paint stripping or othering the power plants up. By all means ask them questions, but please bear in mind that every minute that they're not working is costing us money. Thank you very much.